Chapter 1. A curious establishment. St Mary Mead had seen its fair share of changes over the years, but none quite as unexpected as the arrival of Madame Blanchet's patisserie. The quaint high street, with its traditional butcher's shop, the trusted chemist that had been there for generations, and Mrs. Blackett's tea-room, now featured a sleek storefront with elegant gold lettering and a window display that would not have looked out of place in Paris or London. "Most extraordinary," murmured Miss Jane Marple to herself as she paused outside the bakery on a crisp autumn morning. She adjusted her hat, a modest affair with a small cluster of fabric violets, and peered through the pristine glass. Inside, pastries of astonishing intricacy were arranged with artistic precision. Caramel-glazed eclairs, delicate macarons in pastel shades, and towering croquembouches that seemed to defy gravity. Yet, despite the mouth-watering display, something struck Miss Marple as peculiar. The 3 staff members visible through the window, a tall, slender woman with severely pulled-back hair, whom she presumed to be Madame Blanchet herself, a young man with darting eyes, and a round-faced girl with a complexion as pale as flour, wore expressions as stiff as the starched collars of their uniforms, not one smile among them. "Good morning, Miss Marple. Admiring the competition, are we?" Miss Marple turned to find Mrs. Blackett, her old friend and proprietor of the village tea-room, approaching with a basket of groceries. "Good morning, Florence. I was merely observing. Such elaborate confections for our little village. One wonders if they'll find enough customers with such specialized tastes." Mrs. Blackett sniffed disapprovingly. "Foreign nonsense, if you ask me. 7 shillings for a single cake hardly bigger than a thimble. And that Madame Blanchet, though I doubt that's her real name, barely speaks to anyone unless they're buying something. Been open 3 weeks now, and not a single person has seen." Her smile. Indeed, Miss Marple's faded blue eyes sharpened with interest. Most unusual for someone in a customer-facing position. "The whole lot of them are the same. That young man, Pierre, she calls him, jumps like a startled rabbit whenever she speaks to him. And the girl, Lily, from the Carter's farm over in Much-Benham, looks like she hasn't seen sunlight in months." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "I believe I shall have to form my own impression. Perhaps a small indulgence is in order." Before Mrs. Blackett could respond, the village doctor, Dr. Haydock, hurried past them with unusual haste, his medical bag clutched tightly in his hand. "Good morning, ladies," he called over his shoulder. "Can't stop, I'm afraid. Emergency at Gossington Hall. Sir Henry's houseguest has taken suddenly ill." Miss Marple and Mrs. Blackett exchanged glances. Sir Henry Clithering, retired Commissioner of Scotland Yard, and one of Miss Marple's oldest friends, had mentioned hosting a small party during his brief stay at Gossington Hall, which he had borrowed from the Bantrys while they travelled abroad. "I do hope it isn't serious," Miss Marple said, her concern genuine. "Probably too much rich food. Those London types aren't used to country air and hearty meals." Mrs. Blackett replied pragmatically. "Well, I must be getting on. Do come by for tea later and tell me what you think of these fancy French pastries." As Mrs. Blackett continued on her way, Miss Marple took a deep breath and entered the patisserie. A small bell tinkled, announcing her arrival, and the aroma of butter, sugar, and vanilla enveloped her. Despite the warmth of these scents, the atmosphere inside felt oddly stifled. "May I help you, madam?" The tall woman approached, her accent unmistakably French, her tone civil but cold. "Good morning," Miss Marple said with her most disarming smile. "Everything looks so lovely. I hardly know what to choose. What would you recommend for an old lady with a sweet tooth but a modest appetite?" "The passion fruit tart is our speciality," Madame Blanchet replied without a flicker of warmth. "Or perhaps the lavender macarons." "The tart sounds delightful," Miss Marple decided, noticing how the young man behind the counter, Pierre, avoided making eye contact with either her or his employer. As Madame Blanchet turned to select a tart, the bell tinkled again. Inspector Craddock of the county police entered, his normally pleasant face grave. "Miss Marple," he nodded to her, clearly surprised to find her there. "I'm looking for a Miss Lily Carter. I understand she works here." The pale girl with the round face froze, her hand hovering over a tray of croissants. "I am Lily," she said, her voice barely audible. Inspector Craddock's expression softened slightly. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news, Miss Carter. Could we speak privately?" Madame Blanchet stepped forward. "Whatever you have to say can be said here. We are very busy, as you can see." She gestured around the empty shop. Miss Marple noted the flash of irritation that crossed the inspector's face before he regained his professional composure. "Very well. Miss Carter, I regret to inform you that your brother, Thomas Carter, was found dead this morning at Gossington Hall." A small gasp escaped Lily's lips, but she remained otherwise motionless, as if carved from the same marzipan used in the shop's elaborate decorations. "Dead?" Madame Blanchet repeated, showing more animation than she had since Miss Marple's arrival. "Impossible! He was perfectly fine when—" She stopped abruptly. "When what, madam?" Inspector Craddock asked, sharply. "When one last saw him, naturally," Madame Blanchet finished smoothly. "The boy delivers our milk. He was here yesterday morning." "Yes, well, he's at Gossington Hall now, and he's most definitely deceased," the inspector said grimly. "Dr. Haydock suspects poisoning." At this pronouncement, the tart Miss Marple had been about to purchase suddenly seemed far less appetizing. A familiar glint appeared in her eyes, not of pleasure, but of recognition. Like an old soldier hearing the distant sound of gunfire, Miss Marple recognized the opening notes of a dark symphony she had heard too many times before in her long life. St Mary Mead's peaceful facade had cracked once again, revealing the shadows that lurked beneath the surface of even the most ordinary village life. And as always, Miss Jane Marple would be there to follow the discordant notes to their source. Chapter 3. A matter of timing, Madame Blanchet's pâtisserie was unusually busy when Miss Marple returned that afternoon. A cluster of village women, more interested in gossip than pastries, hovered near the counter, while Lily Carter, pale but composed, wrapped an eclair for Miss Weatherby, the retired schoolmistress. The bell tinkled as Miss Marple entered, and several heads turned in her direction. Mrs. Price Ridley immediately abandoned her half-eaten macaron and bustled over. "Miss Marple, have you heard? That poor Carter boy, poisoned, and his sister still working as if nothing had happened. Most unnatural, if you ask me. Grief takes many forms, Amelia," Miss Marple replied mildly. "Some find comfort in routine." She glanced toward Lily, who was mechanically counting change, her movements precise, but her eyes distant. Behind her, Pierre worked with intense concentration on a delicate sugar decoration, his hands betraying the slightest tremor. Madame Blanchet emerged from the back room, her severe hairstyle immaculate as ever. "Mesdames," she addressed the gathered women coolly, "unless you are here to purchase, I must ask you to leave. This is not a tea-room for gossip." Mrs. Price Ridley drew herself up indignantly. "Well, I believe I'll try that passion-fruit tart after all," Miss Marple interrupted smoothly. "And perhaps you could pack one of those lovely eclairs for Sir Henry Clithering. I'm calling on him this afternoon." At the mention of Sir Henry's name, Miss Marple observed a subtle tension in Madame Blanchet's posture. Interesting, but not unexpected. As the other women reluctantly departed, still murmuring among themselves, Miss Marple approached the counter. "I was so sorry to hear about your brother, Miss Carter. Had he been working as a delivery boy for long?" 3 years, ma'am," Lily answered quietly. "Since our father passed. He was saving to study agriculture at college." "A commendable ambition," Miss Marple said gently. "And he was in good health, generally speaking?" Madame Blanchet cut in before Lily could answer. "Miss Carter is not here to be interrogated, madam. The police have already asked their questions." "Oh dear, I didn't mean to pry," Miss Marple apologized, the very picture of an embarrassed elderly lady. "It's just that when something so tragic happens in our little village, one can't help wondering." "One can help spreading speculation," Madame Blanchet replied sharply. She placed the tart and eclair in a small box with practised efficiency. "That will be 9 shillings. As Miss Marple opened her handbag, she deliberately fumbled with her coin purse, sending several coins scattering across the counter. "Oh, how clumsy of me!" Pierre rushed to help collect the coins, and as he did so, Miss Marple noticed a bandage around his left hand. "My dear boy, you've hurt yourself." "It is nothing, madam," he mumbled. "A small burn from the caramel yesterday. Pierre is learning the art of sugar-work," Madame Blanchet explained with a hint of pride, the first positive emotion Miss Marple had seen her display. "He shows promise, despite occasional accidents." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "My niece tried candy-making once. Ended up with the most dreadful blisters. Caramel can be so treacherous when it bubbles up unexpectedly." She gathered her purchase and made her way to the door, then paused as if struck by a thought. "Oh, I nearly forgot to ask. Were you acquainted with Thomas before he came to work here?" "I understand you're new to the area, Madame Blanchet. I knew him only as our delivery boy," the Frenchwoman said stiffly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, we have millefeuille to prepare for tomorrow." Outside, Miss Marple adjusted her hat and set off toward Gossington Hall, her mind sifting through the information like flour through a sieve. Madame Blanchet's defensiveness might be nothing more than a foreigner's natural wariness in a close-knit English village, or it might be something more. Gossington Hall was a flurry of activity when she arrived. A police constable stood at the entrance to the kitchen garden, while a photographer packed equipment into a van. Miss Marple approached with her most innocent expression. "Good afternoon. I'm expected by Sir Henry." The constable, young and eager to please, quickly ushered her through. "He's in the morning room, ma'am, with Mr. Delaney and the inspector." Miss Marple found the 3 men engaged in earnest conversation, which halted abruptly at her entrance. "Miss Marple!" Sir Henry rose to greet her. "Thank you for coming. Inspector Craddock, you know, of course. And this is Julian Delaney, my house guest." The food critic was a thin man in his 40s, with an artistic sweep of silver-streaked dark hair, and the fastidious dress of someone who took great care with appearances. He regarded Miss Marple with polite curiosity. "Sir Henry speaks very highly of your observational skills, Miss Marple," Inspector Craddock said, choosing his words carefully. His tone suggested professional courtesy, battling with the desire to conduct his investigation without civilian interference. "How kind of him," Miss Marple replied modestly. "I've brought an eclair from the patisserie. I thought Mr. Delaney might assess whether it meets the standard of his previous visit." Julian Delaney's eyebrows rose. "That's most thoughtful, though I'm afraid my appetite isn't quite what it was before this morning's unpleasantness." "You were taken ill, I understand?" "Violently so, though nothing compared to that poor boy's suffering." He shuddered delicately. "Most distressing." "Where was he found exactly?" Miss Marple asked, addressing the inspector directly. Craddock hesitated, then evidently decided there was no harm in answering. "In the butler's pantry, beside the deliveries he'd brought. He must have been seized suddenly, knocked over a crate of eggs in his collapse, and the time of death. Dr. Haydock places it between 7 and 8 this morning. The cook found him at 8:15 when she came to fetch cream for Mr. Delaney's breakfast." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "And you were already ill by then, Mr. Delaney?" "Indeed. Woke around 6 with the most dreadful stomach cramps. Sir Henry called the doctor immediately. Most fortunate that it wasn't more serious," Miss Marple observed. "Would you mind showing me the pantry, Inspector? Sometimes seeing a place helps one understand events more clearly." To her mild surprise, Craddock agreed without argument, perhaps influenced by Sir Henry's presence. As they walked toward the kitchen quarters, Miss Marple asked casually, "Is it known yet what type of poison was used?" "Early indications suggest arsenic, but we're awaiting confirmation from the laboratory," Craddock replied. "Here we are." The butler's pantry was small, but meticulously organized, with shelves of preserves, a marble countertop, and a large icebox. A chalk outline on the floor marked where Thomas Carter had fallen. "He was delivering milk, cream, and butter?" Miss Marple asked, glancing at the icebox. "Yes, and eggs, though those were destroyed in his fall." Craddock pointed to a dark stain on the floor. "We've taken samples of everything for testing, of course." Miss Marple's gaze travelled slowly around the room, taking in details that others might dismiss as irrelevant. The height of the shelves, the arrangement of jars, a wall-mounted clock showing 8:10. "Was the clock running when he was found?" she asked suddenly. Craddock looked surprised. "I believe so. Why do you ask?" "No particular reason," Miss Marple said with a gentle smile. "Just an old woman's curiosity about the precise timing of events." Chapter 4. The obvious suspect back. At her cottage that evening, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting momentarily forgotten, as she jotted notes in a small leather-bound book. The facts, as she knew them, were sparse but intriguing, like the first few rows of a complex knitting pattern, where the final design remained unclear. The telephone rang, interrupting her thoughts. "Miss Marple, Inspector Craddock here. I thought you might want to know. The laboratory has confirmed arsenic, poisoning as the cause of death." "I see. Thank you for letting me know, Inspector." "There's more," Craddock continued. "We've found traces of arsenic in a jar of honey in the pantry at Gossington Hall. Carter had access to it while making his delivery. However, the honey itself appears to have come from the patisserie. It was part of a hamper Madame Blanchet sent over yesterday for Mr. Delaney to sample." "How interesting," Miss Marple murmured. "And Mr. Delaney's illness. Mild arsenic poisoning as well, though a much smaller dose. He admitted to trying a small spoonful of the honey yesterday evening. Apparently it's a special lavender variety that Madame Blanchet imports from Provence." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you've spoken to Madame Blanchet about this discovery?" "I'm bringing her in for questioning tomorrow morning. Between her foreign background, her connection to both victims, and certain discrepancies in her account of her whereabouts yesterday, she's our primary person of interest." "I see." After hanging up, Miss Marple sat motionless for several long moments. Then she reached for her address book and dialed another number. "Sir Henry? Miss Marple here. I was wondering if you might indulge an old woman's curiosity. Could you tell me exactly what was in that hamper Madame Blanchet sent over?" The following morning dawned bright and clear. A perfect autumn day that seemed at odds with the dark suspicions brewing in St Mary Mead. Miss Marple was dead-heading roses when her garden gate opened to admit Raymond West and his wife, Joan. "Aunt Jane," Raymond called, "have you heard? The police arrested that French baker woman this morning." "Madame Blanchet? On what charge?" "Murder, of course," Joan said, settling onto the garden bench. "The whole village is talking about it. They found poison in some honey she gave to Sir Henry's guest, and apparently she has no alibi for yesterday morning when she claimed to be visiting suppliers in Market Basing. The shopkeeper she named doesn't remember seeing her," Raymond added with the relish of a writer discovering excellent plot material. "And her young assistant, Pierre, says she left the shop for over an hour, around the time Carter would have been making his delivery to Gossington Hall." "Most incriminating," Miss Marple agreed mildly, "though one must be careful about jumping to conclusions, like the case of Mrs. Emmett's missing diamond brooch. Everyone was convinced the new maid had taken it, when all along—" She trailed off, her gaze distant. "You're not convinced?" Joan asked perceptively. "It does seem very convenient," Miss Marple replied. "Perhaps too convenient," Raymond laughed. "Aunt Jane and her analogies. What is it this time? A gardener who prunes too obviously? A cake that rises too perfectly?" Miss Marple smiled. "Actually, I was thinking of a fishing expedition I once observed. The most flamboyant lure isn't always designed to catch fish. Sometimes it's meant to distract attention from where the true fishing is happening." Before Raymond could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Miss Weatherby, hurrying up the garden path in a state of considerable agitation. "Jane, the most extraordinary thing, Lily Carter has disappeared." "Disappeared?" Miss Marple's voice sharpened. "When?" "Sometime last night. She didn't open the bakery this morning, and when the police went to question her about her employer, they found her lodgings empty, clothes gone too." "That does sound like flight," Raymond observed. "Perhaps she was in league with Madame Blanchet." Miss Marple rose. "I think I shall pay a visit to Inspector Craddock. Would you mind terribly driving me to the police station, Raymond?" At the station they found not only Inspector Craddock, but also Sir Henry and Julian Delaney. The food critic looked markedly improved, though still somewhat pale. "Miss Marple," Craddock greeted her with a mixture of respect and wariness. I'm rather busy at the moment." "I understand you've arrested Madame Blanchet," she interrupted, uncharacteristically. "And now Lily Carter has vanished." "Yes, most damning development," Delaney remarked. "The girl clearly knows more than she's been telling." Miss Marple turned to him. "Mr. Delaney, forgive my impertinence, but you're something of an expert on French cuisine, are you not?" He preened slightly. "I dare say there are few more knowledgeable critics in London." "Then perhaps you can settle a small question that's been puzzling me. In your professional opinion, would a genuine French pastry chef, particularly one of Madame Blanchet's evident skill, use honey in traditional French patisserie?" Delaney blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected question. "Well, no, not typically. Honey is rarely used in classical French pastry. Sugar is the preferred sweetener for its neutral flavour and precise behaviour when heated. Yet Madame Blanchet sent you a jar of honey." "Special lavender honey from Provence," Delaney confirmed, though she suggested it for tea, not pastry. "I see." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Inspector, has anyone examined the supply of arsenic? I presume you've been looking for the source." Craddock hesitated, then apparently decided there was no harm in sharing information widely known in the village. There was a considerable quantity in the gardener's shed at Gossington Hall, used for controlling pests in the rose garden. "And was it secured?" "Not particularly. Anyone with access to the grounds could have taken it." "Including Thomas Carter, during his regular deliveries," Miss Marple observed, "or any of Sir Henry's house guests." Sir Henry raised an eyebrow. "Surely you're not suggesting Julian here?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Miss Marple said mildly, "merely considering all possibilities. Tell me, Mr. Delaney, in your review of Madame Blanchet's establishment, were you planning to be favourable?" The critic shifted uncomfortably. "Between ourselves, no. Her technique is impeccable, but there's a certain soullessness to her creations. Perfect execution without passion. I find that unforgivable in a true artist of pastry." A devastating review from London's foremost food critic could be quite damaging to a new business, Miss Marple remarked. "Are you suggesting Madame Blanchet poisoned me over a potential bad review?" Delaney asked incredulously. "That would be absurd," Miss Marple agreed. "Almost as absurd as sending poisoned honey to a food critic who was certain to taste it and then identify its source." She rose from her chair. "Thank you, Inspector. You've been most helpful." As she and Raymond prepared to leave, Craddock called after her, "Miss Marple, do you know something you're not sharing?" "Not know, Inspector. Merely suspect. But I believe a visit to the Carter farm in Much Benham might prove illuminating. Thomas had a bicycle, did he not?" "Yes, found beside him in the pantry," Craddock confirmed, puzzled. "Why?" "I was merely wondering about timing," Miss Marple replied enigmatically, "and whether a clock that shows the right time twice a day might still be considered accurate." Chapter 5. Out of Time. The Carter farm sat on the outskirts of Much Benham, a modest establishment with fields of barley and a small dairy operation. Miss Marple, accompanied by Sir Henry, who had insisted on driving her, observed the weathered farmhouse with keen interest. "May I ask what we're looking for?" Sir Henry inquired as they approached the front door. "I'm not entirely sure," Miss Marple admitted, "but Thomas Carter didn't simply deliver milk. He helped produce it." and I find myself curious about his habits. Mrs. Carter, the siblings' mother, was a stout woman with grey-streaked hair and work-roughened hands. Grief had carved deep lines around her eyes, but she received them with the stoic dignity of someone accustomed to life's hardships. Thomas was a good boy, she stated firmly after they had settled with tea in her kitchen. Never gave me a moment's trouble. Not like— She stopped abruptly. Not like Lily, Miss Marple prompted gently. Mrs. Carter's lips tightened. I didn't say that. Of course not. But I understand Lily has gone missing. Gone back to London, most likely, Mrs. Carter muttered. Always talking about London, that girl. Never satisfied. With country life? She lived in London before? Sir Henry asked, surprised. 2 years ago. Said she was going to be a fashion model. Mrs. Carter's tone conveyed her opinion of such ambitions. Came back 6 months later with fancy notions and no money. Thomas got her the job at that French woman's shop. Miss Marple sipped her tea thoughtfully. Thomas was very protective of his sister, I imagine. Too protective, if you ask me. That girl could twist him around her little finger. Mrs. Carter shook her head sadly. If she'd asked him to walk through fire, he'd have done it with a smile. He was planning to study agriculture, I believe. Had a scholarship to the college in Danemouth, due to start in January. Pride briefly illuminated Mrs. Carter's worn face. First in our family to go for higher education. A remarkable young man, Miss Marple agreed. Did he keep a diary, or a notebook? For his farm observations, perhaps? Mrs. Carter hesitated, then rose and left the room. She returned moments later, with a small, leather-bound journal. He wrote in this every day. Records of milk production, weather patterns. He was methodical, my Thomas. Miss Marple accepted the journal with a murmur of thanks. She leafed through it carefully, noting the precise handwriting and detailed annotations. Thomas made his deliveries by bicycle, she asked, pausing on a page. 6 days a week. Up at 4:30 every morning to help with milking, then out with deliveries by 6. Back by 9 to help on the farm. Miss Marple nodded, still studying the journal. What an interesting entry. Clock at GH still wrong. Reminder to self. Actual time plus 17 minutes. Gossington Hall, Sir Henry explained. The clock in the butler's pantry has been troublesome for years. Runs slow, no matter how often it's wound. I see. Miss Marple returned the journal to Mrs. Carter. One last question, if I may. When did you last see Lily? Yesterday afternoon. She came to collect some of her things. Said she couldn't stay in her lodgings with reporters hanging about. On the drive back to St Mary Mead, Miss Marple sat quietly, her mind working through the new information. Sir Henry, who recognized the signs of intense concentration, waited until they were nearly home before speaking. You found something in that journal, didn't you? Perhaps, she acknowledged. The clock that's always 17 minutes slow is certainly curious. And Mrs. Carter's comments about Lily were most illuminating. Do you think the girl had something to do with her brother's death? I think, Miss Marple said carefully, that we need to speak with Pierre at the patisserie, and I should very much like to examine Thomas Carter's bicycle. They found Inspector Craddock at the village police station, looking harried. No sign of Lily Carter, he reported, and Madame Blanchet refuses to say anything without a solicitor present. One's coming from London tomorrow. What about the bicycle? Miss Marple asked. Craddock looked surprised. "It's in storage with the other evidence. Standard delivery bicycle, nothing remarkable about it." "Were the tyres examined?" "The tyres? No, why would they be?" "I'd like to see them, if I may." Bemused, but cooperative, Craddock led them to a small outbuilding where evidence was stored. Thomas Carter's bicycle stood against one wall, an ordinary black model with a large basket attached to the front. Miss Marple approached it with the air of a connoisseur examining a fine painting. She bent to inspect the tyres, then the chain, and finally the frame itself. "Just as I thought," she murmured. "What is it?" Sir Henry asked. "A puncture in the rear tyre. Recently mended, but not very expertly." She straightened with a slight grimace as her old joints protested. "Now, we really must speak with Pierre." They found the young Frenchman alone at the patisserie, methodically cleaning equipment. The closed sign was displayed, but he admitted them when Sir Henry knocked. "The shop is closed until further notice," he said nervously. "Police orders." "We understand," Miss Marple assured him. "We just have a few questions that might help clear up this dreadful business." Pierre's eyes darted between them. The bandage on his hand was gone, revealing an angry red burn. "That looks painful," Miss Marple commented sympathetically. "Caramel is so treacherous. I once knew a young woman who worked in a sweet shop. Such dreadful burns she got from pulling toffee." "It was an accident," Pierre mumbled. "Of course. Tell me, how long have you worked for Madame Blanchet?" 3 years, since her shop in Paris." "And Lily? She joined more recently, I believe." 6 months ago." A slight flush coloured Pierre's pale cheeks. "When we decided to open the shop here." Miss Marple nodded encouragingly. "You're fond of Lily, aren't you?" The flush deepened. She is a colleague. A very pretty colleague." Miss Marple's voice was gentle but persistent. "Did Thomas approve of your interest in his sister?" Pierre's expression darkened. He had no right to interfere. Lily is not a child. Yet he did interfere. He told her I was not suitable. Pierre's accent thickened with emotion. That she should set her sights higher than a baker's assistant. "That must have hurt," Sir Henry observed. Pierre shrugged, attempting nonchalance. "It does not matter. Now, Lily has gone." "Do you know where?" Miss Marple asked quickly. "No." But his eyes shifted away too rapidly. Miss Marple changed tack. "The honey that was sent to Gossington Hall, was that your idea, or Madame Blanchet's?" Pierre looked startled. "The honey? It was. I don't remember." "But you packed the hamper?" "Yes, Madame instructed me on what to include." "And where is Madame's special lavender honey kept?" "In the storage room, with the other imported ingredients." "Accessible to anyone in the shop?" Pierre nodded. "Yes, but why would anyone—" "Just one more question," Miss Marple interrupted gently. "The morning Thomas died, did you mend his bicycle tyre?" The question landed like a stone, dropped into still water. Pierre's face went completely blank, then crumpled in distress. "How did you know?" he whispered. Miss Marple's eyes, though kind, were unflinching. "The timing, Pierre. It all comes down to timing." Chapter 6. Bitter Confections. "I didn't kill him," Pierre whispered, his hands trembling as he clutched the edge of the counter. "You must believe me. I only fixed his tire." "Perhaps we should sit down?" Miss Marple suggested gently, nodding toward the small table in the corner of the bakery, where customers occasionally took their coffee. Once seated, Pierre seemed to gather himself. Thomas arrived early that morning, before 6. He said he had a flat tire halfway from the farm. I helped him patch it while he sorted his deliveries for us. "That was kind of you," Miss Marple observed. "It was not kindness," Pierre admitted, a flash of resentment crossing his face. "He had information I wanted. About Lily, about her past in London, things she would not tell me." Pierre's jaw tightened. I thought if I helped him he might, but he only laughed, said I knew nothing about his sister, that I was a fool to trust her. Sir Henry leaned forward. "And what did you do then?" "Nothing." He took his delivery crate and left for Gossington Hall. Pierre's eyes darted between them nervously. "Then Madam sent me to the bank when it opened at 9. When I returned, everyone was talking about Thomas being dead." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Did Madame Blanchet speak with Thomas that morning?" "No, she was in her office doing accounts." "I see. And the honey that was sent to Gossington Hall, it was kept in the storage room where anyone could access it." "Yes, but and when was it packed into the hamper?" Pierre frowned in concentration. "The afternoon before. Madam selected the items, but I arranged them and delivered the hamper to Gossington Hall around 4 o'clock. "You delivered it personally?" Sir Henry asked, surprised. "Yes. Mr. Delaney had specifically requested items for his article. Madame wanted to ensure everything was perfect." Miss Marple's needles would have been clicking rapidly had she had her knitting with her. As it was, her fingers moved slightly in her lap, working invisible stitches as her mind connected threads of information. "One last question, Pierre. Where is Lily now?" The young man's expression closed like a door slamming shut. "I don't know." "I think you do," Miss Marple persisted gently. "And I think she may be in danger." "From whom?" "The police think Madame is guilty. The killer is still actively concealing evidence," Miss Marple said gravely. "If Lily knows something incriminating—" Pierre paled. "She is staying at my cousin's flat above the bookshop in Market Basing. She was afraid after Thomas died. Afraid she might be next." Miss Marple and Sir Henry exchanged glances. "Thank you, Pierre," Sir Henry said, rising. "We'll ensure she's protected." As they left the patisserie, Sir Henry turned to Miss Marple. "Should we inform Inspector Craddock?" "Not quite yet," she replied. "I believe we need to speak with Mr. Delaney first, and I should like another look at that pantry clock." Julian Delaney was enjoying tea in the garden at Gossington Hall when they arrived. He greeted them with the practised charm of a man accustomed to social niceties. "Miss Marple, Sir Henry, what a pleasant surprise. Do join me. The cook has prepared some rather marvellous scones, not up to Madame Blanchet's standards, of course, but quite acceptable." "Most kind," Miss Marple said, settling into a garden chair. "Though I'm afraid this isn't entirely a social call. We're still trying to understand exactly what happened to poor Thomas Carter." "Tragic business," Delaney agreed, his expression appropriately solemn. "Though I understand the police have their culprit. That French woman had a decidedly cold manner. I'm not entirely surprised she harboured murderous tendencies. You found her manner off-putting during your professional assessment?" Miss Marple inquired. "Absolutely. Technical perfection, but no warmth, the cardinal sin in culinary arts. He buttered a scone with precise movements. Her eyes never smiled, not even when customers praised her work. An interesting observation from a food critic, Miss Marple commented. I didn't realize facial expressions factored into culinary reviews. The experience is holistic, Miss Marple. Atmosphere is as important as flavour, I see. And did you form an opinion of her assistants as well? The boy seemed competent enough, if rather timid. The girl was pretty but unremarkable, typical country simplicity. Delaney sipped his tea. Though I understand she's disappeared. Guilty conscience, perhaps. Or fear, Sir Henry suggested. Indeed, Mr. Delaney, would you mind terribly if I used your telephone? There's a call I should make to my nephew. By all means, in the drawing-room. Once inside, Miss Marple headed not for the drawing-room, but directly to the butler's pantry. Sir Henry, understanding her intent, stood watch at the door while she examined the troublesome clock. Still 17 minutes slow, she murmured, comparing it to her wristwatch. And this position on the wall, perfectly visible from the door, but not from the icebox where the deliveries would be placed. Her inspection complete, Miss Marple rejoined Delaney in the garden, apologizing for the delay. Not at all, he assured her. Though I'm afraid I must prepare for departure soon. My editor expects my column by tomorrow, and I've a train to catch this evening. Without completing your review of Madame Blanchet's establishment? Miss Marple asked innocently. Given the circumstances, a review seems inappropriate, though I've gathered enough impressions to form a professional opinion. Not a favourable one, I understand. Delaney's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. As I mentioned, technical skill alone doesn't make for culinary artistry. My readers expect discernment, not blind praise. Of course. Though I wonder, did you form this opinion before or after tasting her creations? I beg your pardon. It's just that, according to Pierre, you specifically requested certain items for your review. Yet, when I mentioned that you found her work lacking in soul, you agreed quite readily. I wondered if perhaps you'd already decided on your verdict. A flash of annoyance crossed Delaney's face. I've been reviewing restaurants and bakeries for 15 years, Miss Marple. One develops an intuition in these matters. How fascinating. Rather like my intuition about gardens. I can often tell when something isn't quite right, even if I can't immediately identify the problem. She smiled benignly. For instance, I've been puzzling over the timing of Thomas Carter's death. Dr. Haydock placed it between 7 and 8, yet the pantry clock showed 10 past 8 when the body was discovered at 8:15. Clocks can be unreliable, Delaney said dismissively. Oh, indeed, especially that one, which Thomas Carter knew ran 17 minutes slow. So when the clock showed 10 past 8, the actual time would have been nearly half past. Sir Henry watched the exchange with growing comprehension, while Delaney's expression remained politely baffled. I fail to see the significance, he said. Don't you? It's really quite crucial. Miss Marple's gentle voice belied the sharpness of her gaze. Because if Thomas was alive and well, when Pierre fixed his tire before 6 and dead by 7:30, well, that rather narrows the window of opportunity, doesn't it? Especially for someone who was supposedly violently ill in bed during those hours. Chapter 7. Layers of Deception. Julian Delaney's composure, so carefully maintained throughout their conversation, faltered for just an instant. A slight widening of the eyes, a momentary tension in his shoulders. Then he laughed, a sound of practised amusement that didn't quite reach his eyes. "My dear Miss Marple, are you suggesting I somehow left my sickbed, poisoned a delivery boy, and returned without anyone noticing? All while suffering from arsenic poisoning myself? Quite a feat for a middle-aged food critic with a sensitive constitution." "It does seem improbable," Miss Marple agreed mildly, "though I've often found that improbable things happen with remarkable frequency. Rather like Mrs. Willet's prize dahlia blooming in October. Most unusual, but there it was." Sir Henry, sensing the delicate balance of the conversation, intervened smoothly. "We're simply trying to establish a clear timeline, Delaney. The discrepancy with the clock is curious. I'm afraid I can't help you there." Delaney glanced at his wristwatch. "And if you'll excuse me, I really must pack for my train." As they watched him stride back toward the house, Sir Henry turned to Miss Marple. "You believe he's involved?" "I believe," she replied carefully, "that Mr. Delaney knows more than he's telling us. And I think it's time we found Lily Carter." Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Craddock, looking considerably perturbed as he approached across the lawn. "Sir Henry, Miss Marple, I've been looking for you. There's been a development." He glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. Madame Blanchet's solicitor arrived earlier than expected and provided evidence that may exonerate her completely. "Indeed?" Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly. "She has train tickets and receipts proving she was in London the morning before Carter's death, meeting with suppliers as she claimed, and her solicitor has produced sworn statements from 2 independent witnesses who saw her there." "How very convenient," Miss Marple murmured. "There's more," Craddock continued. "The laboratory has found traces of arsenic not only in the honey, but also on a spoon in the butler's pantry, one that was never part of the hamper from the patisserie." "Suggesting the poison was added after delivery," Sir Henry observed. "Precisely, which means anyone at Gossington Hall could have done it. The staff, a guest even." Craddock hesitated. "Even Sir Henry himself," Miss Marple completed calmly, "though I think we can all agree that's rather far-fetched." "Quite," Craddock agreed hastily. "The point is, we no longer have sufficient evidence to hold Madame Blanchet." "You've released her?" "Had to. She's returned to the patisserie." Miss Marple's fingers twitched slightly, the only outward sign of her intense concentration. "Inspector, I believe Pierre mentioned that Lily Carter is staying with his cousin in Market Basing. It might be prudent to ensure her safety." Craddock frowned. "Why? Do you think she's in danger?" "I think," Miss Marple said carefully, "that she may know things that make her position precarious, and I think we should speak with her before anyone else does." An hour later, they stood outside a small flat above Hargreaves' bookshop in Market Basing. The police constable Craddock had dispatched knocked firmly on the door. "Miss Carter, police, we'd like to speak with you." Silence greeted them. After a second, more insistent knock, Craddock signalled to the constable, who produced a key obtained from the shop owner downstairs. The flat was small but neat, with modest furnishings and the lingering scent of floral perfume. It was also, quite obviously, empty. "She's gone," Craddock stated unnecessarily, "though not in a hurry by the looks of it. Clothes missing from the wardrobe, toiletries from the bathroom. May I?" Miss Marple asked, gesturing to a small writing desk in the corner. Craddock nodded, and she began a careful examination of the papers scattered across its surface. Receipts, a half-written letter, a train timetable. Most interesting, she murmured, holding up a page torn from a magazine. An advertisement for Delaney's column in the London Chronicle, and here she pointed to a barely perceptible notation in the margin. An address in Chelsea. Delaney's London address, Sir Henry suggested. Perhaps, but more significantly, look at this. She held up a crumpled receipt she'd found in the wastebasket. A payment for a photography session at Belmont Studios in London, dated 18 months ago. Craddock looked puzzled. I don't see the significance. Don't. You, Lily Carter, told her mother she went to London to become a fashion model 2 years ago. What if she was actually modelling, but not for fashion? Understanding dawned on Sir Henry's face. You think Delaney knew her in London? I think it's worth investigating, Miss Marple replied. And I think we should return to St Mary Mead immediately. Something about this case has been troubling me from the beginning. A pattern that wasn't quite right, like a knitting stitch dropped several rows back. As they drove back to the village, Craddock received word via police radio that Madame Blanchet had resumed operations at the patisserie, with Pierre assisting her. There was, however, no sign of Lily Carter. I don't understand why she'd run if she's innocent, Craddock muttered. People run for many reasons, Inspector, Miss Marple observed, fear being the most common. But sometimes they run towards something, not away from it. They were passing the vicarage when Miss Marple suddenly asked Sir Henry to stop the car. I've just recalled something I should discuss with the vicar's wife, she explained. It won't take a moment. Mrs. Price, a gentlewoman with a keen interest in village activities, received Miss Marple warmly, despite the unexpected visit. I was wondering, Miss Marple began after pleasantries had been exchanged, if you happened to take any photographs at the garden party last month, the one where Madame Blanchet provided those delightful petits fours. Why, yes, several. The church committee is planning to use them for the parish newsletter. And might I see them? I'm particularly interested in any that might show our new French pâtissier. Mrs. Price obligingly produced a small envelope of photographs. Miss Marple examined them carefully, her eyes narrowing as she came to one showing a group near the refreshment table. May I borrow this? I promise to return it. Of course, dear. Though it's not a particularly good one. Several people aren't even looking at the camera. Back in the car, Miss Marple showed the photograph to Sir Henry and Inspector Craddock. You notice anything unusual about Madame Blanchet in this picture? They studied the image. The severe Frenchwoman stood near her display of pastries, not smiling as usual, while nearby Julian Delaney was caught in profile, apparently speaking to another guest. They're deliberately not looking at each other, Sir Henry observed after a moment. Precisely, Miss Marple agreed, like two people very carefully pretending to be strangers. You think they knew each other before? Craddock asked, frowning. I think, Miss Marple said, her voice suddenly firm with conviction, that we need to speak with Madame Blanchet again. And this time we should ask about her connection not only to Julian Delaney, but to a photographer's model named Lily. They approached the village. They could see an unusual amount of activity near the high street. A police constable hurried toward them as they slowed. Inspector! "There's been another incident at the patisserie," he reported breathlessly. "Madame, Blanchet has collapsed. Dr. Haydock says it's poison. Same symptoms as before." Zug Chapter 8. A Test of Character. The atmosphere at the village hospital was tense as Dr. Haydock emerged from Madame Blanchet's room, his expression grave. "She's stabilized," he reported to the small group gathered in the corridor. Miss Marple, Sir Henry, Inspector Craddock, and a visibly distressed Pierre. But it was a near thing. The dose was smaller than what killed young Carter, but still dangerous. "Was it arsenic again?" Craddock asked. "Yes, though we'll need the laboratory to confirm. The symptoms are consistent." "How was it administered?" Miss Marple inquired. "In her tea, it appears. She became ill shortly after Pierre brought her afternoon cup." All eyes turned to the young Frenchman, who blanched. "I did not. I would never," he stammered, switching rapidly between French and English in his agitation. "The tea was made from the patisserie's own supply?" Miss Marple pressed. "Yes, madame. The same blend Madame Blanchet drinks every day. I prepare it exactly as she likes. 1. Sugar, no milk, and you left it unattended at any point." Pierre hesitated, then nodded miserably. "For perhaps 2 minutes. A customer had a question about a special order. When I returned, Madame was already drinking it." "Was anyone else in the shop?" Sir Henry asked. "Several customers, and Mr. Delaney had just arrived." "Delaney?" Craddock's eyebrows rose. "I thought he was leaving for London. He said he wanted one last pain au chocolat for the journey," Pierre explained. Miss Marple's faded blue eyes sharpened. "And was he alone with the tea at any point?" I cannot say for certain." The shop was busy. Dr. Haydock interrupted gently. "Madame Blanchet is conscious now, though very weak. She's asking to speak with you, Miss Marple." "Me?" Miss Marple looked surprised. "Not Inspector Craddock." She was quite specific. Madame Blanchet lay propped against pillows, her normally immaculate appearance diminished by illness. Without her severe hairstyle and formal attire, she seemed smaller, more vulnerable, and considerably younger than Miss Marple had previously estimated. "Thank you for coming," she said weakly, her accent less pronounced than usual. "The doctor says I am fortunate." "Indeed," Miss Marple agreed, settling into the chair beside the bed, "though I suspect fortune had little to do with it. The poisoner didn't intend to kill you, merely to reinforce suspicions against someone else." A flicker of surprise crossed the Frenchwoman's pale features. "You understand, then?" "Not everything," Miss Marple admitted, "but enough to know that you've been playing a role, Madame Blanchet. Or should I call you by another name?" A ghost of a smile touched the woman's lips. "Blanchet was my mother's name. I am Claire Rousseau. But here I needed to be someone else, someone no one would connect with Julian Delaney." "Because you knew him in London?" "Yes, I was his assistant for 3 years at the Chronicle, and briefly." She hesitated. "More than that. Until something happened to end the relationship," Miss Marple prompted gently. Claire's expression hardened. "He stole my work. A series of articles I'd researched on traditional French patisserie. Published them under his own name, and won Whodunit, prestigious award. When I threatened to expose him, he ensured I was dismissed for theft of company property." "So you reinvented yourself as a French pastry chef, I trained in Paris for 2 years. My mother was French. I grew up speaking. The language, the accent I exaggerate, but the skills are genuine." A note of pride entered her voice. "I wanted to build something of my own, something Julian couldn't take from me." "And then he appeared at your shop." "Pure coincidence, or so I thought initially. He didn't recognize me at first. The Claire he knew wore fashionable clothes and smiled constantly. Madame Blanchet was a different person entirely. But eventually he realized who you were," Miss Marple suggested. "At the garden party last month, I saw the moment of recognition in his eyes." Claire's fingers twisted in the bedsheet. "He came to the shop afterward, threatened to write a devastating review unless I paid him to keep silent about my fraudulent background. Blackmail," Miss Marple murmured. "Yes, but I refused. I told him my work would speak for itself." "And Lily Carter? How does she fit into this?" A flash of something, anger, fear, crossed Claire's face. "She worked for him in London, as a model for food photography initially, but later. Julian has a pattern with young women. Promises, flattery, then abandonment when they become inconvenient." "She came here following him?" "Following me," Claire corrected. "She contacted me in Paris last year, told me everything about his plagiarism, provided evidence I could have used to expose him. When I decided to open a shop in England, she asked to come along. I thought she wanted a fresh start. Now I wonder." She broke off, fatigue evident in her drawn features. "Just one more question," Miss Marple said. "Thomas Carter, did he know about his sister's connection to Mr. Delaney?" "Not initially, but recently, yes. He confronted me about it last week, demanded to know why I had hired Lily when I knew her history. He was very protective of her, even though she didn't always tell him the truth," Miss Marple observed. Claire's eyes flickered toward the door. "Be careful, Miss Marple. The person who did this, who killed Thomas and poisoned me, is still out there, and they're clearly desperate." Miss Marple patted her hand reassuringly. "I believe the truth is very nearly assembled, like a complex pastry with many layers. We just need to apply a little heat to see how it all comes together." Outside in the corridor, she rejoined the others, her expression thoughtful. "Well," Sir Henry prompted, "what did she tell you?" "Several illuminating things," Miss Marple replied. "Most significantly, that Julian Delaney is not merely a food critic, but also a blackmailer with a history of exploiting young women, including Lily Carter." Craddock looked startled. "You think Delaney poisoned Thomas Carter? But he was ill himself that morning, was he?" Miss Marple's voice was mild, but her eyes were sharp. "We have only his word and convenient symptoms that miraculously improved once Thomas was dead." "But why kill the delivery boy?" Craddock persisted. "I think," Miss Marple said slowly, "that Thomas Carter discovered something dangerous, a connection that threatened someone's carefully constructed plan. And I believe we will find answers at Gossington Hall. Is Mr. Delaney still there, preparing for his departure?" "As far as I know," Sir Henry confirmed. "Then we should return immediately. And Inspector," Miss Marple turned to Craddock, "I suggest we inquire specifically about the whereabouts of Lily Carter. I fear she may be in grave danger, if indeed she isn't already complicit." As they prepared to leave, Dr. Haydock approached with a puzzled expression. "The strangest thing," he reported. "I've just examined the teacup Madame Blanchet used. There are two distinct sets of fingerprints on the handle, hers and someone else's, and there appears to be a trace of lipstick on the rim that doesn't match her shade." Miss Marple nodded, unsurprised. "The final piece of the pattern. Now we must move quickly before our quarry realizes how much we've discovered." Chapter 9. Threads Unravelled. Twilight was settling over Gossington Hall when Miss Marple, Sir Henry, and Inspector Craddock arrived. A soft golden light emanated from the drawing-room windows, giving the old house a deceptively peaceful appearance. "Mr. Delaney's train leaves in less than an hour," Sir Henry noted as they approached the front door. "If he's still here, he'll be in a hurry." The butler, Simmons, greeted them with his customary reserve. "Mr. Delaney is indeed preparing to depart, Sir Henry. He's just finishing his packing. Would you like me to inform him you're here?" "Yet," Miss Marple interjected smoothly, "we've had a rather tiring day, and I wonder if we might have some tea first." "Of course, madam. In the drawing-room." Once they were settled, Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice low. "Inspector, I believe we should check whether anyone else is staying at Gossington Hall tonight. A young woman, perhaps." Craddock raised an eyebrow, but stepped out to make discreet inquiries with the staff. He returned moments later, his expression confirming Miss Marple's suspicion. "A young woman arrived by taxi about an hour ago," he reported. "Described as fair-haired, slim, wearing a blue coat. The maid showed her to the east guest room." "Lily Carter?" Miss Marple said with quiet certainty. "She's been hiding in plain sight all along." Sir Henry looked puzzled. "But why come here? If she's involved in her brother's death, that's what we need to determine." Miss Marple glanced toward the door, "and I believe our first opportunity has just arrived." Julian Delaney appeared in the doorway, elegant in a travelling suit with a silk scarf draped casually around his neck. His expression flickered between annoyance and forced politeness at finding unexpected visitors. "Sir Henry, Miss Marple, and Inspector Craddock, if I'm not mistaken. To what do I owe this pleasure?" "I'm afraid I'm rather pressed for time." "We won't keep you long," Craddock assured him. "Just a few final questions about the events surrounding Thomas Carter's death." "I've already told you everything I know." Delaney consulted his wristwatch pointedly. "My train leaves at 7:30. You hadn't mentioned your prior acquaintance with Madame Blanchet," Miss Marple observed mildly. "Or should I say Claire Rousseau?" The change in Delaney was subtle, but unmistakable. A tightening around the eyes, a slight stiffening of his posture. "I'm not familiar with that name." "Oh, strange. She remembers you quite clearly from your time at the London Chronicle, as does Lily Carter." "The village girl? I barely know her. Another curious lapse of memory," Miss Marple commented, "since she worked as your model for food photography in London. Before you, what was Claire's phrase? Ah, yes, abandoned her, when she became inconvenient." Delaney's facade of polite confusion hardened into something colder. "I see Claire has been spinning tales. Hardly surprising for a woman who invented an entire false identity." "Perhaps," Inspector Craddock interjected, "you'd care to explain why Lily Carter is currently upstairs in your guest room." Before Delaney could respond, a soft voice spoke from the doorway. "Because I invited her." They turned to find a young woman standing there. Not Lily Carter, but a slim, elegant lady with chestnut hair and delicate features. "My dear," Sir Henry rose in surprise, "I wasn't expecting you back until tomorrow." "I caught an earlier train, darling. Mrs. Bantry, for it was indeed the mistress of Gossington Hall, returned early from her travels, stepped into the room. When I learned from Mrs. Price about all the excitement in the village, I could hardly stay away." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "You've met Lily Carter, then?" "Just this afternoon. Poor girl, she's had such a dreadful time of it." Bantry glided across the room with practised social ease. "Julian kindly offered her sanctuary here until things settle down." "Very kind indeed," Miss Marple agreed, watching Delaney carefully, "though one wonders why she needed sanctuary if she's done nothing wrong." "The girl's brother was murdered," Delaney said impatiently, "and now someone has poisoned her employer. She's naturally frightened." "Yes," Miss Marple nodded, "though I wonder which frightens her more, the murderer or the possibility of being exposed as an accomplice." A charged silence followed this statement, broken by Mrs. Bantry's light laugh. "My dear Miss Marple, surely you're not suggesting that timid little thing could be involved in murder? She nearly fainted when I offered her a cup of tea." "Did she? How interesting." Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Mrs. Bantry's hands, elegant, well manicured, with a distinctive ruby ring on the right index finger. "I've always believed that people reveal their true natures in moments of crisis. Some become stronger, some weaker, and some simply continue their performance." Mrs. Bantry's smile remained fixed, but something flickered in her eyes. "What an intriguing observation." "Indeed. For instance, when Madame Blanchet was poisoned this afternoon, there was a trace of lipstick on her teacup that didn't match her shade. A distinct coral colour, very similar to what you're wearing now, Mrs. Bantry." The elegant woman's hand moved unconsciously to her lips. "Pure coincidence, I assure you. I only arrived in the village an hour ago." "From London, you said? On the same train Mr. Delaney was planning to take this evening, perhaps?" Miss Marple turned to Sir Henry. "When exactly did Mrs. Bantry telephone to say she was returning early?" Sir Henry looked uncomfortable. "She didn't, actually. It's a surprise visit." "A surprise indeed." Miss Marple's voice remained gentle, but her eyes were penetrating. "Especially since Mrs. Price told me just this afternoon that she'd spoken with you, Mrs. Bantry, only yesterday, and you mentioned not returning for another week." The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. Inspector Craddock moved slightly, positioning himself between the door and Mrs. Bantry. "I think," Miss Marple continued, "that if we were to compare this lady's fingerprints with those found on Madame Blanchet's teacup, we might find an interesting match, just as we might discover that she is not in fact Mrs. Bantry at all." The elegant woman stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate care, she placed her teacup on the side table. "You're even cleverer than Julian," said Miss Marple. Her voice had changed, the refined accent giving way to something harder, more determined. "But you're too late. By now, Lily will have found what we came for." As if on cue, a scream echoed from upstairs, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Chapter 2. Whispers and Suspicions. By noon, the news of Thomas Carter's death had spread through St Mary Mead with the efficiency that only a small village gossip network could achieve. Miss Marple, seated in her garden with her knitting needles, clicking rhythmically, was not surprised when her nephew, the writer Raymond West, appeared at her garden gate. "Aunt Jane," he called, striding down the garden path. "I've just heard the most extraordinary news at the Blue Boar. A murder at Gossington. Hall of all places, and poor old Sir Henry right in the thick of it." Miss Marple's needles never faltered in their steady movement. "I wouldn't go so far as to call it murder yet, dear, though Inspector Craddock did mention suspected poisoning." Raymond settled into the wicker chair opposite her. "Suspected poisoning sounds like murder to me. The village is positively buzzing with theories. Mrs. Price Ridley is convinced it's the work of foreign anarchists targeting Sir Henry because of his Scotland Yard connections." "That seems rather dramatic," Miss Marple observed mildly. "Thomas Carter was a local boy from Much Benham. His sister works at that new patisserie." "The bakery where nobody smiles," Raymond exclaimed. "Colonel Bantry's gardener's wife was telling me about it at the pub. Most peculiar establishment. The young man worked as a delivery boy, didn't he? For several businesses in the area." "He delivered milk to the patisserie," Miss Marple confirmed. Madame Blanchet seemed quite shocked at the news. Raymond leaned forward eagerly. "What do you make of her, aunt? I've heard she's a most forbidding woman." Miss Marple considered the question thoughtfully. "She reminds me somewhat of Miss Hartnell's, former governess, a woman who carried secrets behind a rigid exterior. But it would be premature to form any definite opinions." The garden gate creaked again, and they looked up to see Sir Henry Clithering himself approaching, his normally jovial face drawn with concern. "My dear Miss Marple," he said, taking her extended hand, "what a dreadful business! I came as soon as I could get away from the police. Raymond, good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "Sir Henry," Miss Marple said warmly, "please sit down. You look quite exhausted." The retired commissioner sank gratefully into a chair. "It's been a trying morning. The poor boy was found in the pantry by my cook. He delivered groceries earlier, a special order of cream and butter for a dessert at my dinner party tonight. Now the party's cancelled. Gossington Hall is crawling with policemen, and I have a most distressed house-guest to contend with." "Your house-guest?" Miss Marple inquired. "Julian Delaney, food critic for the London Chronicle. He's in the area reviewing country establishments and accepted my invitation to stay a few days." Sir Henry frowned. Strangely enough, he'd been to that new French bakery yesterday and was planning to visit again today for a follow-up assessment. "How interesting," Miss Marple murmured, her knitting needles momentarily still. "And was Mr. Delaney taken ill this morning? Dr. Haydock mentioned an emergency at Gossington Hall." Sir Henry nodded. "Yes, violent stomach pains around breakfast time. Haydock says it was likely something he ate, but nothing serious, not like poor Carter. Julian had recovered enough by mid-morning to give his statement to the police." "I understand. Thomas Carter was poisoned?" Raymond asked bluntly. "Haydock believes so. The symptoms were consistent with arsenic. The boy was found doubled over in agony." Sir Henry shook his head grimly. "Inspector Craddock has ordered tests, of course, but it seems clear enough." "But why would anyone want to poison a delivery boy?" Raymond wondered aloud. Miss Marple's faded blue eyes took on a faraway look. "It reminds me of the case of young William Dobbs, who worked at the post office. Everyone thought he'd been targeted for stealing pension money, when, in fact—" She trailed off, a habit her nephew knew well, her mind making connections that others would miss. "In fact, what, Aunt Jane?" Raymond prompted. "Oh, nothing definite," she replied, resuming her knitting. "Merely that things are not always as they first appear." Sir Henry, who had learned over the years never to dismiss Miss Marple's oblique observations, leaned forward. "My dear lady, if you have any thoughts on this matter, I should be most grateful to hear them." "It's far too early for that," Miss Marple demurred. "But I would be interested to know more about this dinner party you were planning. Who was to attend?" "Just a small gathering. Julian, of course, the new vicar and his wife, Dr. Haydock, and I'd invited Madame Blanchet from the patisserie. Julian's suggestion, actually. He was quite taken with her pastries, if not with the woman herself. Said she was an artist with sugar and flour, but had the personality of a cold fish. She was to provide dessert for the evening?" Miss Marple asked. "Yes, that was the arrangement. Carter had delivered extra cream and butter to Gossington's kitchen, but the specialty cakes were to be brought by Madame Blanchet herself later today." Sir Henry ran a hand through his silver hair. "All cancelled now, of course." The garden fell, silent save for the distant church bells marking the hour and the gentle click of Miss Marple's knitting needles. "I believe," she said finally, "that I shall pay a visit to Gossington Hall this afternoon, if you don't mind, Sir Henry." "Not at all," he replied, "though I'm not sure what you hope to find that the police haven't already discovered." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Oh, I wouldn't presume to improve on Inspector Craddock's methods, but sometimes a fresh pair of eyes notices different things, especially old eyes that have seen similar patterns before." As Sir Henry took his leave, promising to expect Miss Marple later, Raymond regarded his aunt curiously. "You're already on the scent, aren't you?" he asked with a mixture of amusement and respect. "I merely have questions," she replied, setting aside her knitting and reaching for her gardening gloves. "And before I visit Gossington Hall, I think I shall also stop by that curious bakery once more. I never did get my passion fruit tart." Chapter 10. The Face. Behind the mask, Inspector Craddock reacted instantly, racing toward the stairs with Sir Henry close behind. The woman who had presented herself as Mrs. Bantry made a sudden move toward the French windows, but Miss Marple's voice stopped her. "I wouldn't if I were you. The gardener and 2 constables are watching the grounds." This was, in fact, a complete fabrication, but the woman hesitated just long enough for Simmons the butler to block her path. "I've taken the liberty of locking the garden doors, Sir Henry," he announced with the imperturbable calm of a well-trained servant, "and I've relieved the lady of this." He held up a small pearl-handled revolver. "Well done, Simmons," Miss Marple said approvingly, as though the butler had merely anticipated a request for more tea. Julian Delaney, seeing his accomplice thwarted, lunged toward the main door, only to collide with a young police constable entering from the hall. "I've a message from Dr. Haydock," the constable began, then broke off in surprise as Delaney attempted to push past him. In the ensuing scuffle, Miss Marple calmly walked to the fireplace and picked up a heavy brass poker, which she handed to the constable with a nod. The young man, though bewildered, took the hint and used it to effectively persuade Delaney that resistance was unwise. Moments later, Inspector Craddock returned, his expression grim. Lily Carter is unconscious but alive. She appears to have been struck from behind. Sir Henry is with her until the doctor arrives. And upstairs? Miss Marple inquired. Who screamed? The maid. She found Miss Carter when she went to turn down the bed. Craddock turned his attention to the false Mrs. Bantry. Now, perhaps you'd care to explain who you really are, and what you're doing here impersonating Lady Bantry. The elegant woman lifted her chin defiantly. My name is Vivian Westcott. Not that it matters now. It matters a great deal, Miss Marple contradicted gently, particularly to Thomas Carter and Claire Rousseau. A flash of genuine anger crossed Vivian's face. Claire deserved everything she got. Sanctimonious hypocrite, playing the wounded artist when she was nothing but an opportunist herself. Because she exposed Mr. Delaney's plagiarism. Because she tried to ruin him. Vivian snapped. Julian is a brilliant critic, the best in London. Claire was just a research assistant who got ideas above her station. Julian Delaney, now securely restrained, spoke up with the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to controlling narratives. This is all a misunderstanding. Vivian may have been overzealous in her methods, but I had nothing to do with any poisoning. Indeed. Miss Marple raised her eyebrows. Then perhaps you can explain why you pretended to be violently ill the morning Thomas Carter died. An illness that miraculously improved once the poor boy was beyond help. I was genuinely unwell, Delaney insisted. Food poisoning, most likely. A most convenient ailment, Miss Marple observed, creating both an alibi for yourself and suspicion toward Madame Blanchet's patisserie. Though it does raise an interesting question about the timing of events. Inspector Craddock, following her train of thought, nodded. If Carter was poisoned between 7 and 8, as Dr. Haydock estimated, then Mr. Delaney's illness, which began at 6, couldn't have been caused by the same poisoned honey, Miss Marple completed. Unless, of course, he knew the honey was poisoned because he had arranged it himself. The drawing-room door opened to admit Sir Henry and Dr. Haydock, the latter looking weary but satisfied. Miss Carter is coming around, the doctor reported. Nasty bump on the head, but no serious damage. She was quite lucid when I left her, asking for Miss Marple, in fact. For me? Miss Marple looked surprised. Said you'd understand about the notebook, Haydock elaborated. Something about timings. Understanding dawned in Miss Marple's eyes. Thomas Carter's journal. Of course, that's what they were looking for. May I? She gestured toward the stairs. Certainly, Sir Henry agreed. Though perhaps the inspector should accompany you. Lily Carter was propped against pillows in the guest bedroom, a bandage around her head and her face pale but composed. A uniformed policewoman sat discreetly by the window. Miss Marple, Lily greeted her weakly. I knew you'd figure it out. Thomas always said you were the cleverest person in the village. Thomas spoke of me? Miss Marple asked, surprised. He admired how you solved that business with the vicarage roof lead last year. A ghost of a smile touched Lily's face. Said, you noticed things others missed, like the fact that you've been afraid since your brother died, Miss Marple observed. Not just of the murderer, but of being implicated yourself. Lily nodded, wincing slightly at the movement. I knew how it looked. I'd worked for Julian in London. I'd helped Claire gather evidence against him. And then Thomas—" Her voice broke. "Your brother discovered something incriminating," Miss Marple prompted. "In Julian's room, when he was delivering to Gossington Hall a few days ago. He found letters between Julian and Vivian, planning to destroy Claire's reputation and business. Lily's hands twisted in the bedcovers. Thomas confronted me, thinking I was still in league with Julian. I tried to explain that I'd only taken the job at the patisserie to help Claire, but he was so angry about my past deceptions. So he went to confront Julian directly. The morning he died, he told me he had proof that Julian was planning something criminal. Photographs of the letters, records of their meetings. He kept everything in his notebook. Which is why you came here tonight, Miss Marple surmised, to find that evidence. Vivian contacted me after Claire was poisoned. Said if I didn't help her find Thomas's notebook, she'd tell the police was involved in both poisonings. Tears welled in Lily's eyes. I didn't know what to do. When I got here, she told me to search Julian's room while she created a diversion downstairs. But instead, I tried to telephone the police. That's when someone struck me from behind. Julian, Inspector Craddock concluded grimly. He must have slipped upstairs when we arrived. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. The timing still puzzles me. If Thomas confronted Julian that morning— Julian was prepared, Lily explained. He'd already poisoned the honey, planning to make it look like Claire was targeting him out of professional jealousy. When Thomas arrived making accusations, Julian saw an opportunity to silence him and frame Claire in one stroke. But the pantry clock, Miss Marple persisted. It showed 8:10 when Thomas was found, but was actually running 17 minutes slow. Thomas knew about that clock, Lily said. It was in his notebook. He was always very precise about timings for his deliveries. Miss Marple nodded slowly, the final pieces falling into place, which means he died at approximately 7:53, nearly 2 hours after leaving the patisserie with his mended bicycle tire. And if Julian staged his own illness, he had a clear opportunity to intercept Thomas, administer the poison, and return to his room before anyone noticed his absence, Craddock concluded. Lily looked between them anxiously. You believe me, then? I do, Miss Marple said gently, though I believe there's still one piece of evidence we need to find. She glanced toward the bedside table, where a large leather-bound book rested, Sir Henry's copy of Birds of Southern England, conspicuously out of place in a guest bedroom. May I? Without waiting for a response, she opened the book to reveal its hollowed-out interior, where a small worn notebook lay hidden. Thomas's journal, Lily confirmed in a whisper. The real one. I had it all along. Chapter 11. The Final Pastry. The drawing-room at Gossington Hall had the hushed atmosphere of a courtroom. As Miss Marple, seated in a comfortable armchair by the fire, carefully turned the pages of Thomas Carter's journal. Around her gathered Sir Henry, Inspector Craddock, Dr. Haydock, and a pale but determined Lily Carter, who had insisted on coming downstairs. Julian Delaney and Vivian Westcott sat under guard, their earlier confidence replaced by a sullen resignation. It's all here, Miss Marple said finally, looking up from the small, weather-beaten notebook. Thomas was indeed extraordinarily methodical. Times of deliveries, weather conditions, people he encountered, and more recently, his suspicions about Mr. Delaney. "Suspicions aren't evidence," Delaney interjected sharply. "Photographs, however, are quite compelling," Miss Marple countered, extracting several small snapshots tucked between the journal's pages. "Thomas appears to have used his sister's camera to document the letters he found in your room. Letters outlining a systematic campaign to destroy Claire Rousseau's reputation and business." Inspector Craddock examined the photographs with growing interest. "These constitute clear evidence of criminal conspiracy, and combined with the poisonings—" "I had nothing to do with any poisoning," Vivian insisted. "That was entirely Julian's idea." Delaney's head snapped toward her. "You conniving—" "Please," Miss Marple interrupted mildly. "There's no need for further deception. The pattern is quite clear now, like one of Madame Blanchet's elaborate pastries with all its layers, visible when sliced." She adjusted her glasses and addressed the room as though conducting a village committee meeting rather than exposing a murderer. When Julian Delaney discovered that the acclaimed new pâtissier in St Mary Mead was actually Claire Rousseau, the woman whose work he had stolen years before, he saw both a threat and an opportunity. A threat because she could expose his plagiarism to the world, damaging his reputation beyond repair. An opportunity because by discrediting her first, he could ensure any accusation she made would seem like mere retaliation. "The honey was the key," Sir Henry observed, "a most unusual choice for a French pastry chef." "Precisely," Miss Marple agreed. "Claire herself told me that honey is rarely used in classical French patisserie. Yet it was included in the hamper, sent to Gossington Hall, at Julian's specific request, I suspect, though he later claimed it was Madame Blanchet's idea. A perfect vehicle for poison, easily traced back to her." "But why poison himself?" Dr. Haydock asked. "Surely that was an unnecessary risk." "A calculated one," Miss Marple explained. "He needed to establish himself as a victim, not a perpetrator. By consuming a small amount of the poisoned honey the evening before, enough to cause noticeable symptoms but not permanent harm, he created both an alibi for himself and damning evidence against Claire." "And Thomas?" Lily asked softly. "He wasn't part of the original plan, was he?" "No," Miss Marple's voice gentled. "Your brother's death was improvisation, desperate and cruel. When Thomas confronted Julian that morning with evidence of his plot against Claire, Julian saw an immediate threat that had to be eliminated. The poisoned honey intended to frame Claire was already available. So Julian gave Thomas a fatal dose, while pretending to be confined to his sickbed," Craddock summarized. "Yes, taking advantage of the confusion his own illness had created. The household believed him too sick to leave his room, providing the perfect cover to intercept Thomas in the pantry." Miss Marple turned a page in the journal. "According to Thomas's own notes here, he arrived at Gossington Hall at approximately 7:30, delayed by his flat tire. The pantry clock, which he knew ran 17 minutes slow, showed 10 to 8 when he entered, meaning the actual time was 7:33, and the cook found him at 8:15, Sir Henry recalled. By which time Julian had returned to his sickbed, leaving a dying Thomas to be discovered by the staff. Miss Marple concluded. A cruel but effective misdirection. Delaney's composure finally cracked. "You can't prove any of this. It's pure speculation based on the ramblings of a delivery boy." "On the contrary," Miss Marple replied calmly. Thomas's journal records your exact words during your confrontation. I won't let a nobody like Claire Rousseau destroy what I've built. She should have stayed buried in Paris where she belonged. Most incriminating, wouldn't you agree, Inspector? Craddock nodded grimly. Combined with the evidence of conspiracy in those photographs and the laboratory's confirmation of arsenic poisoning, it's more than enough for an arrest. As the inspector formally charged Julian Delaney and Vivian Westcott, Miss Marple turned to Lily. "There's one thing I still don't quite understand," she said quietly. "Why did you come to St Mary Mead in the first place? Surely there were safer places to start anew." Lily's tired face softened. "It was Claire's idea. She knew I needed to escape London after everything with Julian. When Thomas told me she was opening a shop here, it seemed perfect. A quiet village where Julian would never think to look for either of us. We never imagined he'd come here for a review." And the lack of smiles at the patisserie. Professional? Discipline, Claire called it. But really, it was fear. Fear of being recognized, of the past catching up with us. Lily shook her head sadly. "Thomas kept telling me I needed to be honest with him about everything. If I had been— Your brother was trying to protect you," Miss Marple said gently. "Just as you tried to protect Claire by helping her gather evidence against Julian. Sometimes our protective instincts lead us into dangerous waters." The next afternoon, a pale spring sunshine illuminated St Mary Mead as Miss Marple made her way to the hospital. She found Claire Rousseau sitting up in bed, her severe hairstyle softened, reading the latest edition of the London Chronicle. "They've announced Julian's arrest," Claire said by way of greeting. "The article mentions alleged poisoning, but nothing about his plagiarism or blackmail. The full story will emerge at trial," Miss Marple assured her. "Are you feeling stronger?" "Much. Dr. Haydock says I can leave tomorrow." Claire set aside the newspaper. "Lily told me everything you did. I don't know how to thank you." "There's no need," Miss Marple replied, "though I would suggest one small change when you reopen the patisserie." "Oh?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Perhaps you might consider smiling occasionally. Your pastries are truly exceptional. They deserve to be served with joy." For the first time since her arrival in St Mary Mead, Claire Rousseau's face transformed with a genuine radiant smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "I believe," she said softly, "that could be arranged." Chapter 12. The Sweetness Returns. 3 weeks after the arrest of Julian Delaney and Vivian Westcott, St Mary Mead had returned to its peaceful rhythm, though with a few notable changes. Miss Marple observed these from her favourite bench in the village square, where she sat knitting a blue scarf while enjoying the mild June sunshine. Across the square, Madame Blanchet's patisserie, now bearing a discreet new sign reading Claire's Patisserie, had reopened to considerable local fanfare. The window display was as immaculate as ever, showcasing towers of pastel macarons, glistening fruit tarts, and delicate chocolate creations that looked almost too perfect to eat. The most remarkable transformation, however, was not in the shop itself, but in the people within it. Through the gleaming windows, Miss Marple could see Claire Rousseau chatting animatedly with Mrs. Price Ridley, her previously severe expression replaced by genuine warmth. Behind the counter, Pierre arranged pastries with artistic precision occasionally glancing toward the door with undisguised anticipation. "Waiting for Lily, I expect," Raymond West commented, settling onto the bench beside his aunt. "They make quite the pair, those two. Young love flourishing from tragedy. Rather poetic, don't you think?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple replied, her needles clicking steadily, "though I suspect it's as much about shared healing as romance. They've both had a difficult time of it." Raymond nodded thoughtfully. "Joan and I visited the Carter farm yesterday. Mrs. Carter seems to be coping remarkably well, all things considered. She's a resilient woman, and having Lily home more often has been a comfort, I believe." Speaking of comfort, Raymond produced a small white box tied with string. "Claire insisted I bring you this. A thank-you gift," she said. Inside the box lay an exquisite miniature Charlotte Russe, decorated with delicate rose petals crystallized in sugar. "How lovely!" Miss Marple murmured, genuinely touched. "Though solving puzzles is its own reward, you know. Aunt Jane." Raymond shook his head with fond exasperation. "You unmasked a murderer, and prevented what might have been a second death. A little pastry seems the least she could offer." Miss Marple's lips curved in a slight smile. "I simply observed what was there to be seen. The circumstances were most revealing if one paid attention to the patterns. The village's very own Scheherazade," came a familiar voice as Sir Henry Clithering approached, looking considerably more relaxed than when they'd last met. "Weaving the threads of a mystery into a coherent tale." "Sir Henry, I didn't know you were still in the area, finishing up some business before returning to London," he explained, joining them on the bench. "The Bantrys arrive home tomorrow. The real Bantrys, I should say. I wanted to ensure Gossington Hall was properly restored after our recent excitement." "And the legal proceedings?" Miss Marple inquired, moving swiftly. "Delaney and Miss Westcott will stand trial next month. Given the evidence in Thomas Carter's journal and their subsequent confessions, conviction seems certain." Sir Henry's expression sobered. "A tragedy that might have been averted if Delaney had simply accepted Claire's success instead of viewing it as a threat." "Pride," Miss Marple observed quietly, "so often lies at the heart of human darkness. Like old Mrs. Emberley's prize roses, beautiful to behold, but concealing the sharpest thorns." The village square had grown busier as they spoke, with shoppers moving between the greengrocer's, the butcher's, and the bakery. Miss Marple noticed Lily Carter emerging from the post office, a small package tucked under her arm. She wore a simple blue dress and a tentative expression that brightened considerably when she caught sight of Pierre watching for her from the patisserie doorway. "She's taking classes in photography now," Miss Marple remarked. "Proper training at the Technical College in Market Basing. Her brother would have approved, I think." "And will she continue working at the patisserie?" Raymond asked. "For now, though Claire has encouraged her to pursue her own path." Miss Marple's needles slowed momentarily. "That's the silver lining in all this darkness. 3 young people finding their authentic selves after years of pretending to be something they weren't." "3?" Sir Henry inquired. "Claire, Lily, and Pierre. Each wearing a mask, each afraid in their own way. Now they can simply be." She gestured toward the patisserie, where Pierre had stepped outside to greet Lily, his previous nervous demeanor replaced by quiet confidence. The sound of laughter drew their attention as the couple entered the shop together, Claire welcoming them with a genuine smile. Through the window, they could see other villagers inside, enjoying coffee and pastries at the small tables that Claire had recently added. A continental touch that had initially raised eyebrows, but was now embraced by the locals. "Remarkable how quickly people adapt," Sir Henry observed. "A month ago, the village was suspicious of the foreign bakery where nobody smiled. Now it's the heart of the community. People are often more adaptable than they appear," Miss Marple replied, returning to her knitting. "Like my hydrangeas, plant them in one type of soil. They bloom blue. Move them to another, and they turn quite pink. The essence remains the same, but the expression changes according to circumstances." They watched Dr. Haydock enter the patisserie, accepting a cup of coffee from Claire with warm familiarity. Even Inspector Craddock, passing through the square on police business, paused to exchange pleasantries with the group inside. "Will you miss it?" Raymond asked unexpectedly. "The investigation, the unravelling of the puzzle?" Miss Marple considered the question, her faded blue eyes surveying the peaceful village scene before her. "There will always be other puzzles, dear. Human nature remains constant, even when circumstances change. One simply needs to observe the patterns." She completed another row of stitches before adding softly, "But I am glad to see smiles in the bakery at last. Sometimes the simplest pleasures are the most profound." As if to punctuate her statement, the door of Claire's patisserie opened, and Pierre emerged carrying a tray of tiny pastry samples. He moved through the square offering them to passers-by, a gesture of community and confidence that would have been unimaginable weeks before. "Miss Marple," he called, approaching their bench with a bow that was both playful and sincere. "Would you and your companions care to try our new creation? Claire has named it Révélation, a hidden raspberry centre surrounded by layers of meaning. I mean meringue." Miss Marple accepted the delicate confection with a smile. "How perfectly appropriate, and so much more pleasant than unmasking murderers, wouldn't you agree?" The sweet taste of resolution, she reflected as the village hummed, with renewed life around her, was indeed the most satisfying ending of all.